Hello and welcome to another episode of Bicycle Touring Talk. I am George Schlackheck,
the one and only,
telling you about my adventures in Central America. I'll begin where I left off the last time, February 4th, 2013 in Jutiapa, Guatemala, where I was taking a rest day before crossing the border into El Salvador on my journey south. It was a pretty lazy day, exactly what I needed after crossing a lot of mountains in Guatemala. My legs were definitely feeling it, even as I was walking around town. Lunch was later than usual, near the market. Afterward, I spent time exploring the market and buying some fruits and peanuts for later. I definitely stuck out as a gringo, but the vendors were all very friendly and allowed me to take their pictures. This was supposed to be my last full day in Guatemala. I thoroughly enjoyed the afternoon in this relatively small but busy city. The only other tourists I met were a group from somewhere in the US on an organized tour. Guatemala is a very colorful country, and despite of what some people say, it is safe to visit. The biggest risks I encountered were traffic and road condition related, not desperate people. The persons I had contact with were all honest and helpful. I went to sleep a bit earlier that day in anticipation of a big ride into the unknown territory the next morning. I was warned about my choice of route that was supposedly
un poquito peligroso.
a bit dangerous. According to my host at the hotel, there were criminals hanging out in the area who were just waiting to rob travelers. I had heard stories like these before and never encountered any problem. After a while, it just becomes a reminder to remain alert at all times, not to call off a journey. When I hit the road the next day, it became apparent pretty quickly that climbing steep hills and serpentines was once again the real challenge. I took my time, as after each turn the view got a little bit more stunning. The toughest part was up to Yupiltepeque, a small town up in the higher elevations where I stopped for a cold drink at a licuado's place. Originally, I had thought I'd be rejoining the Pan American Highway before crossing the border, but instead found a route that led to a less busy crossing. The ride went pretty smoothly after the initial climbs. The area definitely had the feel of a border region. The funny thing about it was that I was expecting the border installations at least 10 kilometers before I was even anywhere near them. For a change, the border crossing was absolutely free of charge. Nobody asked me for a departure tax on the Guatemala side, and in El Salvador, a huge sign announced that the border services were gratis, free of charge. As soon as I had crossed, I found a little roadside restaurant run by two friendly ladies. They were curious about my tour, but said that they do see cyclists pass by once in a while. Only 30 kilometers to Santa Ana, they told me. And it was
todo plano,
meaning all flat. Of course, Santa Ana was the nearest major city, and it seemed to be my best bet to find all the services I needed. First, there was a place to sleep. Then the ATM. I had a few quetzales left, but put them aside. El Salvador uses US dollars. That was good because they'd be accepted pretty much anywhere. And Panama, my final destination of the tour, was also using the US currency. I actually managed to get a room at a local budget hotel, El Faro, without paying for it first. So after getting everything into my room, I had to find an ATM, which wasn't very hard at all in this vibrant town. After I was all paid up, I simply had to do what I enjoy the most in new-to-me places. Walk around and explore. My steps took me to the market and several other interesting places. I had a great supper for just over $2 US. Santa Ana is a beautiful city. Unfortunately, there also seemed to be a few shady characters who spotted me as a target, asking for money. Poverty is an issue here. The need people have is usually much greater than what you could safely afford. I would not recommend giving anything more than pocket change to a stranger who is asking for money, and if you do it in a discreet way that doesn't show what you have on you. Having said that, beggars aren't criminals. Many of them are probably good persons down on their luck. My hotel also seemed to be in a slightly rough part of town. After dark, they basically seemed to shut down everything. I decided to get a beer just across the street and was escorted back to the hotel by an armed guard. It seemed like overkill, but I also noticed a good number of street people hanging around in the area. So, better be safe than get robbed. Next on my agenda was the ride from Santa Ana to Sonsonate. When I looked at the Google map, it seemed like this was going to be pretty easy. Santa Ana was over 600 meters above sea level, and Sonsonate just over 200. I actually thought this meant a day that consisted mostly of descending hills. Live and learn. As it turned out, there were 2 volcanoes along my way. The result was a 20-kilometer climb. After leaving town, already climbing, cars pulled over beside me to warn about the steep ascent. How bad could it really be? I wondered. After all, I had seen it all in Guatemala, right? Well, let me tell you, this ride was as tough as anything I've ever experienced. The weather was getting hotter by the minute too, a brutal climb that I hadn't expected. I knew I had pretty much made it when an Outlook platform came into view. Of course, I stopped there to take a break and some unforgettable pictures. The route I had taken was the shorter one, but also the tougher one. An alternate way to Sonsonate existed, but was longer and likely much busier. The ride got a lot easier shortly after the Outlook point, and it seemed like I had reached Sonsonate, still over 20 kilometers away, in mere minutes. I stopped on the outskirts of town to enjoy a cold drink and then went straight for the center. It was easy to find a great lunch. Prices were just as good here as in Guatemala, and the US currency simplified it a great deal. The hotel I found was cheap, but there was a catch. They wanted me out by 8 in the morning. When I asked why, it turned out that they were regularly getting hourly clients during the day, whatever that may have meant. The room was clean and well kept. The owners were obviously hardworking people who did what they had to keep business going. I had a working TV and a decent-sized private bathroom. What more can you ask for around $10? Oh yeah, there were some roaches too, bigger ones than I had ever seen, but they seemed to mind their own business. I later went to visit an internet cafe and went for supper, followed by some ice cream. One thing about Sonsonate was that it actually had a designated bike lane going through town, which really surprised me. I did not see the same signs of poverty I had observed in Santa Ana, but also went to my room soon after sunset for some much-needed sleep. I was obviously out pretty early the next morning, February 7th. This was going to be my day to get back to the ocean after so many treks across mountains, jungles, and volcanoes. Acjutla wasn't too far, but I arrived there earlier than I had thought possible, so kept following the coastal road, not really knowing where it would take me. La Libertad was only 88 kilometers away, but perhaps there were other interesting places with accommodations even before that. The coastal road started out flat. Traffic was light, but I got passed by some vehicles that were most certainly not fit for highway use. This trailer is a perfect example. Someone had used a log to make an axle. Bearings not needed. There was one point where I was able to access the beach, and I took advantage, waiting in the warm ocean water for the better part of half an hour or so. This beach was abandoned, but there were nice homes right on it. Whoever owned them wasn't around. Soon after I left that beach, the terrain changed from flat to hilly again. There were stretches of beautiful beaches nestled between cliffs. The road was challenging and windy now, and there were even some tunnels. Most of them were short, but some were long enough to be pretty scary. It was like riding into total darkness from the bright sunshine. Thankfully, traffic wasn't bad, but sharing the passage through the tunnel with big noisy trucks sure didn't feel very safe. Most of the tunnels had no lights at all. The only thing to do was pass through them fast to minimize the chance of encountering motorists that could be surprised by the bike in their lane. The hills were also starting to get to me again. They were short, but the climbing was super slow and repetitive, while the descents went by in a hurry. I was struggling up a steep incline, just reaching the peak, when I spotted a nice roadside restaurant. It was time for lunch anyways. Then I saw the bike and knew right away whose it was. There was Jan, the cyclist I had already met in Mexico and Belize, having an ice-cold drink, flirting with the attractive lady at the counter. We had a reunion over some delicious lunch, comparing routes and discussing the road ahead. I had been able to keep up with Jan's whereabouts occasionally on Facebook, so meeting him again wasn't entirely unexpected. He had passed through a different area of Guatemala and crossed the border much closer to the coast. We had roughly the same idea for the route going forward, with no firm plan where to end that day. Of course, we ended up cycling together again for the afternoon. It wasn't without challenges, as the coastal road continued hilly and there were more dark tunnels. I also had my third flat tire of the journey. It was patched pretty quickly, but made me nervous as it had happened just before entering the longest tunnel yet. The last thing I needed was for the tire to go flat inside the dark tunnel. There was barely enough space to ride the bike. It is a weird feeling when you're inside the darkness and only see a small light at the end that slowly gets bigger as you're coming closer. One thing to bring on your Central America adventure is a set of bicycle lights. I'd suggest to set them into flashing mode for those tunnels. Soon we found ourselves in an area full of surfer hostels and even campgrounds. El Tunco looked interesting enough to check out a bit closer. It must have been a fishing village at some point, but had obviously transformed itself into a surfer's paradise. Besides young people carrying surfboards, beer trucks were occupying the streets. My first reaction was that this place had to be expensive. We decided to ask at a nice-looking hotel anyways. It turned out to be $15 for the room. There were 2 beds in that room, so Jan and I could share it. Jan initially didn't seem interested, citing that the $15 were outside his budget. What he had misunderstood was that the entire room was only $15, so it was just $7.50 each. We decided to take it for 2 nights. It was a good decision as we thoroughly enjoyed the evening at the hostel bar with some other Latin American and international tourists. I got to dance with a young lady from Mexico who had unfortunately had a few too many drinks, which impaired her coordination but lifted her inhibitions. It was fun to dance with her anyways. The following day was a perfect beach day. The only thing missing were surfboards for Jan and I. To this day, I don't know how to surf. Is it too late for me to learn it on a future trip? I've always been intrigued by those who can ride waves that surround them completely. There's another thing for my bucket list. Perhaps there's a surfer watching this video who can give me some tips on where to get started. El Tunco was an unexpected gem. After reading sad things about El Salvador's beaches and resorts, contrary to what travel guides seem to say about El Salvador, it's surprised with amazingly affordable accommodation and beautiful beaches. There were tourists. Most of them were young, and then there was Pilsner, the national beer, named after some famous Czech brew. Cheers, Jan. It probably didn't come close to the real stuff, but sunshine and the beach makes it all taste fantastic. I hope you enjoyed this video. El Salvador had a lot more to offer, and I'll tell you about it in my next episode. In the meantime, there's a lot of content on my channel you should check out. I believe in bicycle touring on a budget. Spend your money on the tour, not the gear. Happy trails, and I'll see you soon.